You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Historically, the word chastity has referred to suppression and control of sexual desire. That's probably why you've heard terms like chastity belt or vow of chastity before. In the modern world, however, chastity has taken on a whole new meaning. For many people, it's not about repressing sexuality. It's about exploring desire, anticipation, control, intimacy, and pleasure in new ways. People engage in chastity play for a wide range of reasons. For some, it's a form of kink. For others, however, it's a way of deepening connection with a partner, exploring power dynamics, or even redirecting focus and energy toward other goals. And perhaps most surprisingly, many people find that restricting access to pleasure actually intensifies desire rather than diminishes it. In this episode, we're going to explore the psychology behind chastity play, including why people are drawn to it, who's into it, and what chastity can teach us about human sexuality more broadly. My guest is Paul Botto, the COO of Kink 3D. He's been working in the queer and kink community in San Francisco for the past 10 years, joining Kink 3D in 2021 as the company's first hire. In addition to overseeing areas of the business ranging from supply chain to customer service and fulfillment, he spearheaded Kink 3D's live events program and has traveled widely across the US and Europe, offering the company's unique chastity cage sizing service. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. Do you want to learn more from me in the form of an online or in-person course? Become sexceptional by getting certified with Sexual Health Alliance, where you can learn from yours truly and a number of top sexuality scholars. Each year with Sexual Health Alliance, I teach courses like Fantasies Around the World, as well as immersive study abroad classes in several exciting countries. Join these programs and become a certified sexuality professional at the same time. From sex therapists to sex educators, sex coaches to sexologists, Sexual Health Alliance streamlines your path to certification while allowing you to learn from leading experts in the field. Most importantly, you'll gain the knowledge, skills, and credentials that you need to excel. Become sexceptional and connect with world-class experts and an engaged community of sexuality professionals from all across the globe. Start your path to certification today at sexualhealthalliance.com. Hi, Paul, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here, and I'm looking forward to talking all about the psychology of chastity with you. So, for a lot of people, the term chastity probably brings to mind some very specific ideas, such as medieval women being forced to wear chastity belts to preserve their virginity, or religious teachings about the importance of abstinence and sex as being sinful. So, let's start with some myth busting. For people who are only familiar with chastity through a historical lens, what's different about the kind of chastity we're talking about here? What does chastity actually mean in modern sexual culture?
Yeah, in general, chastity is definitely not associated with abstinence the way that especially the classic idea was. It actually is very broad. I will say in the current practice, it's actually men or people with penises who actually lock up mostly. And that's for many reasons, including the options to actually engage in chastity with a device is a lot easier when you have genitalia that kind of are conducive to wearing something. That's one of the biggest shifts is that the most people who lock up do have penises and testicles. I would say that quite the opposite of like the idea of controlling in a negative way, like non-consensually and for like the absence of pleasure, chastity is often engaged with for all positive reasons. And that can range from personal, just how you want to experience your body and like live your life, to sexual ways where you want to explore your own body or engage with other people in positive ways, especially sexually. And as well as like relationally, where people use it to like affirm relationships in ways that are like quite the opposite of this like controlling, denying aspect that we kind of all grew up with thinking about back in the day.
Yeah, so there's been a pretty big shift over time in terms of what chastity kind of means in sexual culture. And when we're talking about it through that historical lens, chastity was something that was primarily associated with women, right? As you mentioned, it was a way of controlling women's sexuality. But today, most of the people who are practicing chastity are often men, as well as trans and non-binary folks. And so I was wondering, you mentioned about the genitalia in terms of certain types might be easier to lock up than others. But I wondered if you could also talk a little bit about, are there other reasons why there might have been this shift over time where maybe chastity is something that's more eroticized for men now?
I think, maybe as a preface, like I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, which after moving here, I didn't quite realize how much like kink, sex positivity was like kind of part of this culture. So I've learned a lot over the last 15 years. And from my own experience working in this industry and knowing people in this community, I think there is a component that people who are engaging in more sex positive lifestyles kind of outside what has traditionally been the norm have sought out a lot of different things. And chastity is one of them. And the gay community, the queer community tends to also, I think, be very forefront and communally about that, kind of very out and sharing that. And so I think there's some elements of that as like sexual mores have shifted and sexual liberations happened. And as the queer community has become, we came out of the AIDS crisis, it's now a flourishing kind of community where it's a lot of easier to be sex positive. And the kink community has flourished. And this has been, I think, flourishing in the kink community primarily kind of for a while. Though I do think it's starting to kind of become a little more known outside of the mostly queer and kink focused communities where larger groups of people from all sexualities and relationship styles are starting to embrace it. And I think the other major component that's like been part of that shift are the options on the table to actually engage with it with a physical device. For many, many years, there were very limited options. They were uncomfortable. The quality was, sometimes not great. The design was only so good. But in the last few years, maybe the last 10, a lot of technologies evolved and designs have come out that are comfortable and they look good, they feel good. And so that's actually made it a lot easier to try and enjoy. And I think that's kind of, again, spurring on the exploration. And then maybe lastly, there's this kind of weird but kind of synergistic effect that we don't know how to like quantify. But the lockups during COVID, I think, was an interesting period where people were isolated from each other and locked down. But a lot of people weren't able to engage in the same sexual ways and intimate ways with other people. And chastity can be long distance in a way that other things can't. So I think there was aspects of that kind of synergistically went together.
Yeah. So as you were speaking there, I was thinking about a couple of different things in terms of broader cultural trends that have happened in the last few years. And one of them is that there has been this mainstreaming of kink, right? So kink just in general used to be something that was very much on the fringes, but now we see it everywhere in media and in pornography. And I think that's made it more accessible and approachable to a lot of people. But when it comes to chastity specifically, we're seeing a lot more of that represented in pornography than we did in the past. And so I think that visibility also just kind of opens up the door for more people to be kind of interested and curious about it. Like when it's something that you've never seen before and then you start seeing it regularly, that also might just increase the propensity that people might be curious about potentially exploring that in their own life.
Yeah, for sure. Like many kinks, I think people might be curious and they might have interest in, or they might see it and kind of wonder, but they don't have a chance to learn. Mm-hmm. They don't learn what it is, how to engage with it, how to incorporate it into their lives, or how to do it safely. And so as, the world has gotten easier to communicate, whether it's like OnlyFans or content creators who are showing what's going on with different things that are kind of outside what has traditionally been the norm, and talking about it more openly has made it a lot easier for people to explore. And then that kind of feeds on itself as more people know, they share, they talk, they find community, and it builds.
So, as we've said many times on this show before, two people can share the same fantasy or desire while getting completely different things out of it psychologically. So, when you step back and look at the different people who engage in chastity, do you see any common psychological threads? Like, what is it that people are ultimately drawn to or seeking when it comes to chastity?
We spent a lot of time as we've been in this community trying to understand this more and try to find the through lines that help us see these trends and understand. And when we kind of step back and look at it, I think we look at it from a sense that there's often an element of control, and in a very positive sense of control in that, and as we're talking about it. Again, the spectrum of chastity goes from solo play that's not sexual to, like you said, gender identity and affirmation to relational play. And they all have different aspects of control, whether you're feeling comfortable in your body or kind of taking control of your body and focusing your energies on things that are more productive or that excite you more, or even sexually, finding different ways to engage with your own body sexually. And having that sense of being able to control it is a big part. And then, of course, that kind of plays into the relational aspects quite maybe obviously to me, but maybe not, where there's a lot of aspects of like dom-sub relationships or committed relationships where you want to have a giving of control to someone else, maybe accepting control and that responsibility and that commitment and trust that goes with it. And so chastity kind of can feed a lot of those relationship dynamics that I think people really crave, whether it's for personal reasons or because they want a sense of control in a crazy world, or they want to give up control and have trust in someone else to take care of them. I think that's kind of how we view a lot of the through lines for many, many people.
Yeah. So control is a theme that does seem to keep coming up over and over again. But what's interesting about chastity is that it can be a way of exercising greater control over yourself, or it can be about voluntarily handing control to someone else, right? And so I think when a lot of people hear the term chastity, they think of it necessarily as you're giving up control and that you're surrendering pleasure to someone else. But it can also be this empowering tool in the sense that you're taking control over yourself and your own pleasure and so forth. So it's almost paradoxical in a way that chastity can be about both giving up control and also taking control for yourself.
Absolutely. Some people, and we hear this, we do like informal surveys every year to kind of get a sense of things. And we hear from people who are like, I can't stop jacking off. I can't stop masturbating. I really want to focus on like my studies, or I want to be in the gym. And so this is a way that I can kind of like help take control of that otherwise it's just always an ever-present temptation. And they use that as a physical tool to help focus that. And there's also the fact that some, especially non-binary, trans people, they want to feel in control of their body. And so they can use this as a way to kind of have like a little more actual physical control that's not sexual for most people. It can be, but it's also not. And so again, definitely just physical manifestations of that control that is very positive and affirming. One thing I think I kind of like to mention that I think we often don't talk about and think of is that there are often two sides of chastity. Like there's someone maybe locking up, whether by themselves or in a relationship, but there's often a key holder or a partner who's engaged with that in various ways, sometimes directly and then like very key holding where they're the kind of the responsible party and giving direction, or just a supportive partner who's not engaged, but supporting their partner who's maybe locking up with someone else or by themselves.
So a lot of people would assume that restricting sexual access is going to reduce desire, but many chastity practitioners describe the exact opposite effect. They talk about heightened libido or constant arousal or thinking about sex more than ever. So what's going on when people are limiting access to pleasure that can actually make desire for it feel stronger?
Yeah, so I think that's actually an interesting thing to kind of like highlight is that if you're wearing a chastity device, whether like a full belt or a cage style, you're really limiting access to your genitals, but not the rest of your body. So you're not taking all activity off the table. And so that's just one thing to be aware of. There's lots of other ways people can engage, both with yourself and your partner or other people. But yeah, I think for some people, they lose one aspect of like, fulfillment, enjoyment, sexual pleasure. And so they look toward other places. And some people actually use chastity to help refocus that energy, whether they're going to play with their own body and discover other ways to get off and enjoy themselves, or focus on partners and they focus all their energy on their partner's bodies and their partner's joy and pleasure, or they find ways to engage with their partner where they're getting pleasure in a way that's maybe outside of what they used to with their genitals. Mm-hmm. And so there's definitely a lot of ways to still engage and get that pleasure. And then even for people who don't think of themselves as subs or bottoms can find that wearing a device, and I jokingly tell people who are tops that think they won't do it, I'm like, imagine just your partner walking around grabbing your junk all day long. It's going to be stimulating. It's going to be like kind of reminding you of, oh yeah, this is fun. And then it can build up that pressure in a good way.
Hey, Sex and Psychology listener, looking for another sex ed podcast that you're going to love? Then I recommend one of my favorites, Sex Ed with DB. Sex Ed with DB is a podcast about the sex ed you need, but probably never got before. Host DB has a Master of Public Health from Columbia University with expertise in sexuality and sexual and reproductive health. So rest assured that the show aims to bring you responsible, science-based information. Sex Ed with DB just launched its 14th season, which is focused on pleasure, ranging from the importance of intimacy to what happens in your brain during an orgasm. Join DB as she interviews experts in sex ed, answers difficult anonymous listener questions, and so much more. Use the link in our episode description to find a great starter episode, Maintaining Long-Term Relationships and Keeping the Spark Alive with therapist Dr. Lex Brown James. Check out Sex Ed with DB. As you were speaking there, I was thinking about how something we've talked about on the show many times before is the idea of the orgasmic imperative, and how when sex begins, people often feel like they have to have an orgasm and that that's sort of the ultimate goal of sex. And when people approach sex, they often do it through these very limited sexual scripts that, it says start with kissing, and then there's maybe some touching, and then oral sex, and then intercourse and orgasm and so forth. And it just sort of follows this predictable linear pattern where people are just kind of going through the motions. But the way that you were describing chastity is kind of like a different reframe of the way that we're approaching sex, which makes it so that orgasm isn't the ultimate goal of it, or the thing that, once you start, you're immediately striving for it. It sort of is creating this flexibility to pursue sex and pleasure on your own terms in different and varied ways, and to explore different sources of pleasure, and to recognize that sex isn't just one thing. And I think that might be one of the most valuable lessons that people can learn from the chastity community, is that, hey, here's this thing that's not so penetrative, intercourse, orgasm focused, where it allows for that possibility of a lot of different sexual exploration.
I think that's a really good way of kind of thinking about the traditional focus on how sex is. And I think I never really sat down and thought of it that way, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, chastity definitely helps reframe a lot of what sex could be. And even if you don't know going in, I'm going to guess that you're going to start being creative and start exploring. One thing that you mentioned that I think is important to kind of think about that, especially in the queer community, maybe it's a common discussion or acknowledgement that orgasm maybe doesn't always mean ejaculation and penile orgasm. There's a lot of other ways the body can get off. And so, maybe one type of orgasm classically is not as accessible, but there's others that really are just as fun for the person who's wearing a cage. And just to kind of throw it out there, you can be in a cage or a full belt and still have an orgasm. It may not be the same. It may have some frustration and other things going on, but it doesn't preclude that, which some people really enjoy that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And then, I think the other aspect is, like we've said, is that your partner, people you're actually engaging with sexually, their pleasure can be quite gratifying, and people can really find joy and meaning in giving their partner pleasure, seeing their partner have pleasure. So I think it definitely broadens the idea of what sex and fun is or could be.
So another big part of the appeal of chastity seems to be anticipation. And we know from psychology research that anticipation can sometimes be just as rewarding as that thing that we're actually anticipating, right? But chastity is something that's unique in that it's often this ongoing experience rather than something that's confined to a specific sexual encounter. So for many people, the device might serve, as you were mentioning earlier, as sort of a constant reminder throughout the day of desire or commitment or some relational dynamic that they're participating in. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how chastity taps into anticipation and delayed gratification and ongoing awareness in a way that just sort of makes it a particularly powerful and exciting experience for people.
Yeah, this can take different forms depending on the person or the relationship involved. I know a lot of people in the community, so I hear a lot of stories about how they're engaging with it, and people love to share, and I really love to hear. And so I know some people know they're going to go attend maybe Folsom Street Fair in San Francisco or IML in Chicago. And so they're going to be there and they're going to be excited. It's a fun environment. They're going to see people in the kink and leather community. And so they'll lock up ahead of time as kind of like a preparatory, I'm going to get ready. I'm going to be kind of thinking about this. I'm going to be taking some focus away from my normal ways of engaging, which maybe is building up, like you said. And so there's definitely sometimes people enjoy that. I think other people, again, like relationally, they'll like look at this as like, we have date night on Friday, or me and my partner live in other cities. And so we're going to get to see each other. And so this is a way to kind of build up more than just the fun, but kind of the anticipation of seeing someone and knowing that you're going to get to unlock because they have the key. And so that's meaningful in both a sexual and relational way. So yeah, I think that, again, it has that duality of like both like an emotional, psychological component, in addition to maybe the physical, just pent up physical desire that can happen for people as they refrain from certain types of stimulation.
Yeah, and I think something that may surprise some of my listeners as well is that many people use chastity for reasons that aren't primarily sexual at all, and it's not always used as part of a kink or a fetish. So I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about that too. What are some of the reasons that non-kinky people might be drawn to chastity?
So like even like just starting kind of outside sex altogether, some people just want to, I guess I said earlier, refrain from focusing on sex at all, whether it's for themselves or with other people. They get into a cycle of like masturbation, horniness, porn, and they're not feeling like they're getting what they want out of life. And so they want to redirect energy. And so it's in a sense kind of tangential to sex, but really the focus and the reason they're doing it and the thing that they're getting out of it is something external. And so that's, I think, really a powerful motivator for some people. I think, again, there's also people who are in their trans or non-binary who really, again, want to feel comfortable in their bodies. And so having an identity that doesn't conform to the physicality of your existence, being able to take control of that and just feel comfortable and feel good about that really can be meaningful in ways that, people may not have thought about if they're in that position. That might be a new way that they can engage that might be gratifying and helpful. And then even like for people in relationships, I think people often don't quite appreciate this. I think they think of kink as like it's going to happen in the bedroom. It's like an hour or two. It's meant to be erotic. But people use chastity as like a symbol, just like maybe a wedding ring. We've had people tell us they're getting married and they have one of our devices, and it was kind of like part of the exchange before the ceremony, and they're going to be in the ceremony wearing a device that is more than just practical and fun. It's also a symbol of that relationship and commitment. And that's really meaningful to people that extends beyond just the normal day-to-day like of sex.
So something I've been thinking about is whether there are healthy and unhealthy ways of approaching chastity, right? And so, I think when it's something that somebody really wants to do and they find it empowering or erotic and it, comes from this genuine place of sexual self-expression, that's one thing. But I'm also wondering about, is there a darker side to it where people are sometimes using this more as a form of self-punishment, where it's because they have all of these feelings of sexual shame that are all tied up, and then chastity is just sort of this mechanism for just trying to deal with shame around sex, that they feel like they shouldn't have certain desires or urges. Now, I know that you work in the community of people who find this to be erotic and where it's, a healthy outlet of sexual expression for them. But I'm also wondering if there might be another side to this where sometimes people are drawn to it as a way of just sort of dealing with some of the sexual shame that they have.
Yeah. Like you said, I am in a community of very sex positive people. People who engage with us, come to us, often are wanting to engage with it in that positive way. So I don't have as much knowledge of that. I mean, I'm sure it exists. There's a big world of a lot of people. I do think one aspect that kind of touch on what you're asking is that for some people, I think orgasming, ejaculation, they want pleasure, but that's not the way they want it. So this is a way to kind of like maybe get that. Because again, you can orgasm in a cage, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same experience. And so I think there are some ways this can act as a way to still enjoy, but kind of make you feel more comfortable as you enjoy.
Yeah. And I guess the way I was thinking about this was from the lens of how there's this growing anti-masturbatory movement that we've seen in recent years, where a lot of guys seem to be under the impression that masturbation and orgasm are inherently unhealthy and that, you're wasting your vital life force by ejaculating. And it's, this is why No Nut November exists and so forth, because you have all of these guys who are like, masturbation is bad. I shouldn't be doing it. It saps your body of testosterone and all these other sorts of things. And so, when you were mentioning some people using chastity as a way of, they feel like they're masturbating too much and they want to put some sort of limit on that so they can focus on other activities. I think great for some people that works, but I was thinking more from the perspective of some people kind of have these big hangups around masturbation and orgasm. And so, yeah, you might not necessarily see this in the community of people that you work with, but I wonder if there's sort of this parallel world where some people are kind of approaching chastity as a way that's kind of rooted in these deeply negative views of masturbation and self-pleasure.
You're right. The honest answer is I don't just know those people. And honestly, my guess is given chastity, these devices, the community, I'm not sure they would even seek these out to fulfill that. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's too much 50 Shades of Grey, which again is a pretty complicated thing. I don't mean it to mention that's an amazing thing, but the exposure they have to certain things is in this like, oh, that's kinky. That's not what I want at all. For better or worse, I don't happen to know much about the more negative views of, like you said, masturbation and ejaculation.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm sure that world probably exists just because, we live in an interesting time sexually for our sexual culture where, there is this growing emergence and acceptance of kink and of diverse sexual and gender identities and so forth. But then there's also this growing movement toward sexual conservatism and anti-masturbatory views. And so we just sort of live in this paradoxical time where the culture is becoming more sex positive in some ways and more sex negative in others. But that's what makes my job as a sex researcher really interesting because, it's very complicated and complex, and there are not simple stories about human sexuality. But after being immersed in this world for so many years and hearing about people's experiences, what do you think that chastity teaches us about human sexuality or human desire more broadly? And are there any lessons that we can learn here from people who have maybe never tried chastity before?
I think for me, the more I've learned and been in this community is kind of like you said earlier, how the common idea of sex and pleasure is very small and limited. And maybe because we grow up in a world that for some people it's about procreation or only about things that happen in marriage. And it's very kind of like you don't talk about it, whether it's taboo or just private. And I think chastity really taught me and shown me how broad the idea of what relationships, pleasure, sex, intimacy, control, trust can be. And so I think it really can, once you start exploring that with yourself and others, you really start finding that there's just so much out there. And a lot of it can be really meaningful in ways that people are very, I think, surprised by. They see it, they think it's fun, but after a while, they actually find different aspects of connection that were just not there before. And I think that's actually probably one of the most amazing things that I've learned and seen.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, Paul, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation in the next episode and talking more about specific ways that people incorporate chastity into their intimate lives. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Yes, so I work for Kink 3D. Our website is kink3d.com. We have some great information on there. We have some general information about chastity, as well as a blog where we try to do our best to educate, bring some insight into the community. We have community authors that come in and talk about their experience. I'd also recommend Reddit. There's a lot of actually positive Reddits out there, subreddits out there that have a great community where people talk and share and learn, and they can learn from each other. And so it's a very supportive place, especially things like chastity training. So I think that's another really awesome opportunity to learn more.
Great. Well, I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.